Reductionism is a philosophical position which holds that a complex system is nothing but the sum of its parts, and that an account of it can be reduced to accounts of individual constituents. This can be said of objects, phenomena, explanation, theories, and meanings. Reductionism strongly reflects a certain perspective on causality. In a reductionist framework, the phenomena that can be explained completely in terms of relations between other more fundamental phenomena are called epiphenomena. Often there is an implication that the epiphenomenon exerts no causal agency on the fundamental phenomena that explain it. Reductionism does not preclude the existence of what might be called emergent phenomena, but it does imply the ability to understand those phenomena completely in terms of the processes from which they are composed. This reductionist understanding is very different from that usually implied by the term emergence, which typically intends that what emerges is more than the sum of the processes from which it emerges. Religious reductionism generally attempts to explain religion by boiling it down to certain non-religious causes. A few examples of reductionistic explanations for the presence of religion are that religion can be reduced to humanity's conceptions of right and wrong, that religion is fundamentally a primitive attempt at controlling our environments, that religion is a way to explain the existence of a physical world, and that religion confers an enhanced survivability for members of a group, and so is reinforced by natural selection. Anthropologists Edward Burnett Tyler and James George Fraser employed some religious reductionist arguments. Sigmund Freud held that religion is nothing more than an illusion, or even a mental illness, and Marx claimed that religion is the sigh of the oppressed, and the opium of the people, providing only the illusory happiness of the people, thus providing two influential examples of reductionistic views against the idea of religion. Types. Richard H. Jones delineates 5 types of reductionism and anti-reductionism: emergence, substantive, structural, i.e. causes, theoretical, conceptual, and methodological. Most philosophers delineate 3. Theoretical reductionism. Theoretical reduction is the process by which one theory absorbs another. For example, both Kepler's laws of the motion of the planets and Galileo's theories of motion worked out for terrestrial objects are reducible to Newtonian theories of mechanics, because all the explanatory power of the former are contained within the latter. Furthermore, the reduction is considered to be beneficial because Newtonian mechanics is a more general theory, that is, it explains more events than Galileo's or Kepler's. Theoretical reduction, therefore, is the reduction of one explanation or theory to another, that is, it is the absorption of one of our ideas about a particular thing into another idea. Methodological reductionism. Methodological reductionism is the position that the best scientific strategy is to attempt to reduce explanations to the smallest possible entities. Methodological reductionism would thus hold that the atomic explanation of a substance's boiling point is preferable to the chemical explanation, and that an explanation based on even smaller particles, quarks, and leptons, perhaps, would be even better. Methodological reductionism, therefore, is the position that all scientific theories either can or should be reduced to a single theory through the process of theoretical reduction. Ontological reductionism. Ontological reductionism is the belief that reality is composed of a minimum number of kinds of entities or substances. This claim is usually metaphysical, and is most commonly a form of monism, in effect claiming that all objects, properties, and events are reducible to a single substance. A dualist who is an ontological reductionist would believe that everything is reducible to 2 substances. As one possible example, a dualist might claim that reality is composed of matter and spirit. Nancy Murphy has claimed that there are 2 species of ontological reductionism, one that denies that wholes are anything more than their parts, and the stronger thesis of atomist reductionism, that wholes are not really real. She admits that the phrase really real is apparently senseless, but nonetheless has tried to explicate the supposed difference between the 2. Reductionism and science. This section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. August 2011. Reductionist thinking and methods form the basis for many of the well-developed areas of modern science, including much of physics, chemistry, and cell biology. Classical mechanics in particular is seen as a reductionist framework, and statistical mechanics can be viewed as a reconciliation of macroscopic thermodynamic laws with the reductionist approach of explaining macroscopic properties in terms of microscopic components. In science, reductionism implies that certain fields of study are based on areas that study smaller spatial scales, or organizational units. While it is commonly accepted that the foundations of chemistry are based in physics, and molecular biology is rooted in chemistry, similar statements become controversial when one considers less rigorously defined intellectual pursuits. For example, claims that sociology is based on psychology, or that economics is based on sociology and psychology would be met with reservations. These claims are difficult to substantiate even though there are clear connections between these fields. For instance, most would agree that psychology can affect and inform economics. The limit of reductionism's usefulness stems from emergent properties of complex systems, which are more common at certain levels of organization. For example, certain aspects of evolutionary psychology and sociobiology are rejected by some who claim that complex systems are inherently irreducible, and that a holistic approach is needed to understand them. Some strong reductionists believe that the behavioral sciences should become genuine scientific disciplines based on genetic biology, and on the systematic study of culture. See Richard Dawkins's concept of memes. In his book The Blind Watchmaker, Dawkins introduced the term hierarchical reductionism to describe the view that complex systems can be described with a hierarchy of organizations, each of which is only described in terms of objects one level down in the hierarchy. He provides the example of a computer, which under hierarchical reductionism is explained in terms of the operation of hard drives, processors, and memory, but not on the level of AND/OR gates, or on the even lower level of electrons in a semiconductor medium. Others argue that an appropriate use of reductionism limits our understanding of complex systems. In particular, ecologist Robert Alanowitz says that science must develop techniques to study ways in which larger scales of organization influence smaller ones, and also ways in which feedback loops create structure at a given level, independently of details at a lower level of organization. He advocates and uses information theory as a framework to study propensities in natural systems. Alanowitz attributes these criticisms of reductionism to the philosopher Karl Popper and biologist Robert Rosen. In mathematics, reductionism can be interpreted as the philosophy that all mathematics can, or ought to, be built on a common foundation, which is usually axiomatic set theory. Ernst Zermelo was one of the major advocates of such a view. He also developed much of axiomatic set theory. It has been argued that the generally accepted method of justifying mathematical axioms by their usefulness in common practice can potentially undermine Zermelo's reductionist program. As an alternative to set theory, Žuko van Aenen has argued for second-order logic as a foundation for mathematics instead of set theory, whereas others have argued for category theory as a foundation for certain aspects of mathematics. The incompleteness theorems of Kurt Gödel, published in 1931, raised doubts about the attainability of an axiomatic foundation for all of mathematics. Any such foundation would have to include axioms powerful enough to describe the arithmetic of the natural numbers, a subset of all mathematics. Yet Gödel proved that for any self-consistent recursive axiomatic system powerful enough to describe the arithmetic of the natural numbers, there are true propositions about the natural numbers that cannot be proved from the axioms. Such propositions are known as formally undecidable propositions. Ontological reductionism. Ontological reductionism is the claim that everything that exists is made from a small number of basic substances that behave in regular ways, compared to monism. Ontological reductionism denies the idea of ontological emergence and claims that emergence is an epistemological phenomenon that only exists through analysis or description of a system and does not exist on a fundamental level. Ontological reductionism takes two different forms: token ontological reductionism and type ontological reductionism. Token ontological reductionism is the idea that every item that exists is a sum item. For perceivable items, it says that every perceivable item is a sum of items at a smaller level of complexity. Token ontological reduction of biological things to chemical things is generally accepted. Type ontological reductionism is the idea that every type of item is a sum type of item, and that every perceivable type of item is a sum of types of items at a lower level of complexity. Type ontological reduction of biological things to chemical things is often rejected. Michael Rousset has criticized ontological reductionism as an improper argument against vitalism. In linguistics, linguistic reductionism is the idea that everything can be described in a language with a limited number of core concepts and combinations of those concepts. Limits. A contrast to the reductionist approach is holism or emergentism. Holism is the idea that things can have properties, emergent properties, as a whole, that are not explainable from the sum of their parts. The principle of holism was concisely summarized by Aristotle. In the Metaphysics, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. The term greedy reductionism, coined by Daniel Dennett, is used to criticize inappropriate use of reductionism. In philosophy, the concept of downward causation poses an alternative to reductionism within philosophy. This view is developed and explored by Peter B. G. H. Anderson, Klaus Emeka, Niels Olafenman, and Peter Vetman Christensen, among others. These philosophers explore ways in which one can talk about phenomena at a larger scale level of organization exerting causal influence on a smaller scale level, and find that some, but not all, proposed types of downward causation are compatible with science. In particular, they find that constraint is one way in which downward causation can operate. The notion of causality as constraint has also been explored as a way to shed light on scientific concepts such as self-organization, natural selection, adaptation, and control. In science, the idea that phenomena such as emergence and work within the field of complex systems theory pose limits to reductionism has been advocated by Stuart Kauffman. Emergence is strongly related to nonlinearity. The limits of the application of reductionism are claimed to be especially evident at levels of organization with higher amounts of complexity, including living cells, neural networks, ecosystems, society, and other systems formed from assemblies of large numbers of diverse components linked by multiple feedback loops. Nobel laureate P.W. Anderson used the idea that symmetry breaking is an example of an emergent phenomenon in his 1972 science paper, More is Different, to make an argument about the limitations of reductionism. One observation he made was that the sciences can be arranged roughly in a linear hierarchy: particle physics, many-body physics, chemistry, molecular biology, cellular biology, physiology, psychology, social sciences, in that the elementary entities of one science obeys the laws of the science that precedes it in the hierarchy, yet this does not imply that one science is just an applied version of the science that precedes it. He writes that at each stage, entirely new laws, concepts, and generalizations are necessary, requiring inspiration and creativity to just as great a degree as in the previous one. Psychology is not applied biology, nor is biology applied chemistry. Disciplines such as cybernetics and systems theory embrace a non-reductionist view of science, sometimes going as far as explaining phenomena at a given level of hierarchy in terms of phenomena at a higher level, in a sense, the opposite of a reductionist approach. Free will and religion. Philosophers of the Enlightenment work to insulate human free will from reductionism. Descartes separated the material world of mechanical necessity from the world of mental free will. German philosophers introduced the concept of the nominal realm that is not governed by the deterministic laws of phenomenal nature, where every event is completely determined by chains of causality. The most influential formulation was by Immanuel Kant, who distinguished between the causal deterministic framework the mind imposes on the world, the phenomenal realm, and the world as it exists for itself, the nominal realm, which included free will. To insulate theology from reductionism, 19th-century post-Enlightenment German theologians moved in a new direction, led by Friedrich Schleiermacher and Albrecht Ritschl. They took the romantic approach of rooting religion in the inner world of the human spirit, so that it is a person's feeling or sensibility about spiritual matters that comprises religion. The anti-reductionist takes this position as a minimum requirement upon the reductionist. What is unclear is how the pre-theoretical intuitions, for example, of free will are to be accommodated theoretically within favored analyses. At the very least, the anti-reductionist is owed an account of why the intuitions arise if they are not accurate. Benefits. The section does not cite any references or sources. Please help improve this section by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. March 2009. An ontological reduction reduces the number of ontological primitives that exist within an ontology. This simplifies philosophy, because every ontological primitive demands a special explanation for its existence. If one maintains that life is not a physical property, for example, then one must give a separate explanation of why some objects possess it, and why others do not. This sort of process can prove to be quite complex. Additionally, one would have to prove that a primitive is actually worthy of this status, and not better defined as a variant of something else which is more basic. For example, it would be hard to defend a planet as a primitive, and it would probably be better to treat it as any other massive non-living body, which is an example of reductionism. On the other hand, excessive reduction can lead to oversimplification. For example, there is a clear distinction between animal life and plant life, as animals have powers that plants lack, such as sensation, active locomotion, and arguably emotion. Reducing these both to the same thing could then confuse thought involving either animals or plants. Reductionism can erase important distinctions, especially in more abstract fields of philosophy such as morality or theology. Now, not all distinctions are important. Treating white and black people as the same would usually be valid outside of medicine, history, or cultural studies, for example. This is because, outside of such fields, it is easy to argue that there is no intrinsic difference between the two, though obviously there are possible extrinsic differences, such as traditions and culture. In cases such as this, where the difference between two things is not relevant to the topic at hand, they may be treated as the same kind of thing. Alternatives. The section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. March 2010, the section possibly contains original research. Please improve it by verifying the claims made and adding in lean citations. Statements consisting only of original research should be removed. February 2012. The development of systems thinking has provided methods for tackling issues in a holistic rather than reductionist way, and many scientists approach their work in a holistic paradigm. When the terms are used in a scientific context, holism and reductionism refer primarily to what sorts of models or theories offer valid explanations of the natural world. The scientific method of falsifying hypotheses, checking empirical data against theory, is largely unchanged, but the approach guides which theories are considered. The conflict between reductionism and holism in science is not universal. It usually centers on whether or not a holistic or reductionist approach is appropriate in the context of studying a specific system or phenomenon. In many cases, such as the kinetic theory of gases, given a good understanding of the components of the system, one can predict all the important properties of the system as a whole. In other systems, emergent properties of the system are said to be almost impossible to predict from knowledge of the parts of the system. Complexity theory studies systems and properties of the latter type. Alfred North Whitehead set his metaphysical thinking in opposition to reductionism. He refers to this as the fallacy of the misplaced concreteness. His scheme set out to frame a rational, general understanding of things that was derived from our reality. Sven-Erik Jorgensen, an ecologist, lays out both theoretical and practical arguments for a holistic approach in certain areas of science, especially ecology. He argues that many systems are so complex that it will not ever be possible to describe all their details. Drawing an analogy to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in physics, he argues that many interesting and relevant ecological phenomena cannot be replicated in laboratory conditions, and thus cannot be measured or observed without influencing and changing the system in some way. He also points to the importance of interconnectedness in biological systems. His viewpoint is that science can only progress by outlining what questions are unanswerable, and by using models that do not attempt to explain everything in terms of smaller hierarchical levels of organization, but instead model them on the scale of the system itself, taking into account some, but not all, factors from levels both higher and lower in the hierarchy. Criticism. Fragmentalism is an alternative term for ontological reductionism, although fragmentalism is frequently used in a pejorative sense. Anti-realists use the term fragmentalism in arguments that the world does not exist of separable entities, instead consisting of wholes. For example, advocates of this position hold that the linear deterministic approach to nature and technology promoted a fragmented perception of reality, and a loss of the ability to foresee, to adequately evaluate, in all their complexity, global crises in ecology, civilization, and education. The term fragmentalism is usually applied to reductionist modes of thought, frequently with the related pejorative term of scientism. This usage is popular amongst some ecological activists. There is a need now to move away from scientism and the ideology of cause and effect determinism toward a radical empiricism, such as William James proposed, as an epistemology of science. These perspectives are not new, and in the early 20th century, William James noted that rationalist science emphasized what he termed fragmentation and disconnection. Such views also underpin many criticisms of the scientific method. The scientific method only acknowledges monophasic consciousness. The method is a specialized system that focuses on studying small and distinctive parts in isolation, which results in fragmented knowledge. An alternative usage of this term is in cognitive psychology. Here, George Kelly developed Constructive Alternative Ism as a form of personal construct psychology. This provided an alternative to what he saw as accumulative fragmentalism. In this theory, knowledge is seen as the construction of successful mental models of the exterior world, rather than the accumulation of independent nuggets of truth.